Hello, I'm Bill Ritchie, and I'm talking from Seattle. I'm in my gallery, studio, whatever you want to call it, the mini art gallery, we call it. My wife and I bought this, but that's another story. I was having lunch with my wife today and found myself in a nostalgic mood. I was thinking back in the 1960s when I first got my job here in Seattle, the University of Washington. And I met a man named Larry, and Larry was a graduate student, Master of Fine Arts student in printmaking. He had a terrible thing happen. His studio burned down and all his work for his master's degree was destroyed. And so he had to build it all up from scratch again. Well, undaunted, Larry recovered and got a job teaching here in Seattle at Seattle Pacific University. I met Larry because I came in 1966 and he was just finishing up his second try at his MFA. Anyway, I was reflecting on the fact that when he went to teach at the university here in Seattle, he was the printmaking department chairman. He was chairman of the whole department, and had a budget to buy a press. And so he did the natural thing. He bought a Glenn Alps press because Glenn Alps was his mentor. And besides, those presses were made just a few blocks from the campus. Anyway, it was a big press, electric motor. I don't know how wide, probably like 36 or 40 inches wide. Big thing. It weighed about a ton or more. But when I was thinking about a telephone call I'm going to have tomorrow with a man in Colorado, a man who is teaching, like Larry did, teaching printmaking, and his provost, the administration, has challenged him and everybody on the campus to come up with a strategic plan to face the 21st century, what to provide students with for the 21st century in printmaking. Well, that really interests me because I'm in the 21st century. I'm not a student. I would like to be a teacher in the 21st century, but things have changed so much. I left in 1985. And partly it was because the school where I was didn't want to change and get students ready for the 21st century. It wasn't discussed. It wasn't fashionable. But now it's fashionable. In fact, the provost in Colorado, and also I know of other campuses who are struggling with the same problem of funding, student enrollment, the pandemic, globalization, climate change, and so forth. So it's a challenge to printmaking teachers everywhere to equip their students to deal with this changing world. So I started thinking, what would have happened if in 1967, when Larry was just starting out, instead of equipping his school with a huge press like the one he learned printmaking on at the UW, that he had a miniature press? What if he had learned on one of my miniature half-wood presses? They're here's one right here. My legacy model miniature half-wood press. And I made this in 2004 as a kind of a joke, actually. I had made a 24-inch wide, great big press, weighed about, I don't know, 300 or 400 pounds. And it was so beautiful because I wanted it to be beautiful. I put wood on it, I gave it graceful curves and the rest. And I joked to the maker, Tom, I wish I had a little model of it to put on my mantle. And he made a little model of it, and that's what you just saw. That led to the manufacturing of about 250 presses made to be beautiful, most of them small, and we sold those over the last, 17 or some years. I'm right now making an encyclopedia of those presses, and that's partly what inspired me to think of calling this man in Colorado to talk about the changes facing teachers and students of the 21st century. What if, in 1967, a printmaking teacher like Larry had started students out on small presses, small, personal, portable, beautiful, functional presses, instead of these 2-ton or 1-ton, $10,000 presses, I think are the kinds of presses he has in his studio in Colorado. Think of it. I once did a statistical analysis to see how many people were exposed to printmaking in college. And I came up with 6 million. That's over a period of several decades, based on the population of students in the days that I taught and beyond. I think I did that survey in 2008. And I came up with 6 million people who had been exposed. But in the course of this little business that we had in making half-wood presses, it turned out it wasn't printmaking students who were the only ones buying these miniature presses because they love printmaking. One man is a famous bluegrass musician. You may have heard of him. Peter. Can't think of his last name. Another is a photographer I'm working with. There were photographers, designers, jewelers, wood craftsmen, tinkerers, all kinds of people who they just like printmaking, and it had nothing to do with their college work. So if you consider the fact that the college students who buy these small presses for their personal, professional planning, what if there's a whole larger population also interested in printmaking? Now, the sad truth is that Larry's students probably couldn't get very much printmaking done at that university because they had a small faculty. It turned out the press was a little bit dangerous. It was electrically driven, and they now have shields on it to warn students that they, keep your fingers out of the gears and so on. And that press, incidentally, is still at that university and has naturally been inherited by the current professor, Scott, who also is encumbered, you might say, with this big, old-fashioned 20th century press. So for the 21st century, what I'm recommending is, first of all, rethink the entire history of printmaking, particularly the intaglio processes for which I designed these presses mainly, and think back to the time when we in higher education and printmaking inherited this industrial size notion that bigger is better. From the beginning, intaglio presses started out as industrial machines. They were big. Rembrandt's press is pretty big. It's about, 18 or 20 inch wide bed. The thought of making a 6-inch wide bed or a 3-inch wide bed, as we are currently doing here with a few friends making miniature presses, was unthinkable back in those days. Well, what if we started changing our thinking so that miniature, small is beautiful because of the economics, because of the practicality, and partly because some of the doors of printmaking studios in universities are shut or a little bit unsafe. And certainly the industrial scale processes that are being taught there are not really suitable to the 21st century. Now, there's a whole nother chapter that opens because printmaking was not always an art form. It was not always considered an art, a fine art. Painters adopted printmaking at certain points in time for economic reasons. They could make more money. And it stuck. However, once they stuck printmaking into the fine art schools, it became then a handmaiden, you might say, to the painting departments, and excluded the print's more natural connection to technology. Science, technology, literature, reading, engineering, the other arts, performing arts, music, mathematics even, the components of what we call STEM or STEAM education, STREAM education, is now accessible to the to the student who has studied some printmaking in their curriculum, in their time in the institution. Now, this doesn't take into account the MOOC, the massively open online courses, where some of these processes can, with some work and ingenuity, perhaps with miniature presses or kits, can be taught online. And that's my baby, that's my theme, that's my dream. Finally, capping it all off, as I talked with my wife this morning at lunch, this afternoon at lunch, I came up with, she was saying, how are you going to bring all this down into a tiny, catchphrase or something? And I said, we'll go from lithography to cryptography. She said, that's a lot of graphics. Thanks for watching.